I stood trembling in the living room when my brother tossed a black trash bag at my feet. He gave me 48 hours to leave, convinced I was inheriting nothing but a lesson in humility. He had no idea about the diary Grandma hid under the floorboards 50 years ago, the only thing that could turn my $0 inheritance into his ruin. Pour a drink, because what happened at the will reading will chill you to the bone. My name is Callista Thorne, and as I stood by the open grave, the relentless Seattle rain felt less like weather and more like a judgment. The water drummed a monotonous rhythm against the sea of black umbrellas, drowning out the priest's hollow words about eternal peace and heavenly rewards. I was 26 years old, yet I felt ancient. My body weighed down not just by the soaked wool of my coat, but by the carbon fiber braces locking my hands into rigid claw-like shapes. The nerve damage from the explosion had turned my once steady hands that could titrate volatile chemical compounds with surgical precision, into useless, trembling appendages that now ached with a phantom fire whenever the temperature dropped below 50 degrees. I stood alone at the edge of the family plot. The other mourners gave me a wide berth, treating my disability and my grief as something contagious. To them, I was the tragic Thorne daughter, the broken vessel, the walking reminder of the catastrophe that had started the domino effect leading to this very moment. It had been 6 months since the lab accident at Thorne Pharmaceuticals, and 4 days since the massive stroke that finally claimed both my parents within hours of each other. They had died of broken hearts. The doctors said, but I knew the truth. They had died of stress. They had died watching their legacy crumble along with my dexterity. To my right, under a canopy that seemed large enough to host a wedding reception, stood my brother, Sterling, and his wife, Mallory. They were a portrait of corporate stoicism. Sterling wore a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost more than the average American car, the fabric repelling the rain as effortlessly as he repelled human emotion. He did not look at the coffins. He was too busy checking his platinum watch and subtly nodding to a group of men in gray trench coats standing near the cemetery gates. Those were not friends. They were shareholders, even here, standing 6 feet above our parents. Sterling was closing deals. Mallory stood beside him, clutching a crocodile skin handbag, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She wasn't crying. I could see her tapping her foot impatiently, likely worried that the mud would ruin her limited edition heels. They looked like royalty inconvenienced by a peasant's funeral. I looked down at my own shoes, sensible, orthopedic, and caked in wet earth. The contrast made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes and let the rain hit my face, trying to wash away the memory of the explosion. It played on a loop in my mind, a nightmare I could not wake up from. The shattered glass, the searing heat, the smell of burning chemical reagents and my own flesh. I had been the lead researcher, the prodigy, the one Dad called the future of Thorne Pharma. Now, I couldn't even hold a pen without a stabilizing grip. That explosion had taken my future, and the subsequent lawsuits and stress had taken my parents' health. I had spent the last 2 years before and after the accident living in that house, managing their medications, cooking their meals when the staff was off, and reading to them when their eyes grew too tired. Sterling had been in Europe, or perhaps it was the Maldives. It was hard to keep track of his vacations. He sent postcards, of course. "Thinking of you," scrawled in hasty handwriting that suggested he wasn't thinking of us at all. When the service ended, Sterling didn't wait for me. He and Mallory swept toward their waiting limousine, flanked by the shareholders. I had to wait for the family driver, old Mr. Henderson, to loop around and pick me up in the second car. As I climbed into the back seat, struggling with the door handle because my fingers wouldn't curl properly, I saw Sterling laughing at something one of the investors said. Laughing at our parents' funeral. The ride back to Thorne Manor was silent. The estate loomed out of the mist, a sprawling masterpiece of Gothic revival architecture that had housed 4 generations of Thornes. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, but as the iron gates swung open, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my chest. The house looked different today. Cold, predatory. I walked through the heavy oak front doors, shaking the rain from my coat. My hands were throbbing, a dull ache that radiated up to my elbows. I needed pain medication, and I needed to lie down. "Callista," Sterling's voice echoed across the marble foyer. He was already inside, standing in the center of the room with a glass of scotch in his hand. He hadn't even taken off his coat yet. "Don't get comfortable," I froze. "What?" Sterling gestured vaguely to the grand staircase. "I've instructed the maids to start packing your room. You have 48 hours to clear your things out." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I blinked. Sure, I had misheard him. "Sterling, we just buried Mom and Dad. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about reality." "Callista," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. The amber liquid swirled in the glass. "Dad and Mom left the estate and the company to the one person capable of maintaining them. That person is me. Look at you." He gestured at my hands with a look of undisguised disgust. "You're a liability, a drain on resources. You can't work in the lab anymore. You can't attend board meetings without looking like a victim of a war crime. You don't fit the image of Thorne Pharmaceuticals." "I am a thorn," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I cared for them, for 2 years. Sterling, I was the one changing their IVs. I was the one holding their hands when they took their last breaths while you were flying back from Ibiza." "And you were compensated with room and board," Sterling countered smoothly. "But the charity ride is over. The will is quite clear. This house, the assets, the control, it's all mine. It's a lesson in humility. Callista, you need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet since you can't use your hands." Mallory glided into the room, having discarded her sunglasses. She looked around the foyer as if she were mentally redecorating it already. "Honestly, Callista, it's for the best," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I've heard there are some very adequate assisted living facilities in the downtown district, or perhaps Section 8 housing. I'm sure the government has programs for people in your condition. You just don't fit the aesthetic of Thorne Manor anymore. We're planning to host galas here. We can't have you shuffling around in orthopedic shoes and dropping teacups." "This is my home," I said, tears finally stinging my eyes, not tears of grief, but of pure, white-hot rage. "Grandma built this company. She taught me everything. She wouldn't want this." "Grandma is dead," Sterling said coldly, "and so are Mom and Dad. I am the patriarch now, and I am saying you are out." He snapped his fingers. And the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, stepped forward, looking ashamed. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Gable," Sterling barked. "Move Callista's essentials to the butler's quarters in the basement for tonight. She can sleep there until she arranges her transport. I don't want her cluttering up the master wing." "The basement," I choked out. "The room next to the boiler." "It's warm down there," Mallory smirked. "Good for your nerve pain, isn't it?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the glass from Sterling's hand, but I couldn't. My hands were trapped in their cages, just as I was trapped in this nightmare. I had $0 to my name. My personal accounts had been drained paying for the initial surgeries that insurance refused to cover. And Dad had promised to reimburse me once the estate settled. I had no leverage, no power. I turned away, refusing to let them see me cry. I walked past the grand staircase, past the portraits of our ancestors, and opened the narrow door under the stairs that led to the servants' quarters. The air grew musty and damp as I descended. The butler's room was a 10-by-10 box with a single cot and a small window that looked out at the dirt of the garden beds. I sat on the thin mattress, listening to the muffled sounds of footsteps above my head. They were walking all over me, literally and figuratively. My hands throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I felt small, worthless, just as Sterling intended. Hours passed. The house grew quiet as night fell. The rain continued to lash against the small basement window. I couldn't sleep. The pain in my arms was a dull roar, but the pain in my heart was sharper. I needed water. I crept out of the room, moving silently through the service hallways. I intended to go to the secondary kitchen, but as I passed the ventilation grate that connected the basement to the main study above, I heard a voice. It was Sterling. I froze, pressing my ear against the cold metal of the grate. "Yes, I understand the urgency," Sterling was saying. His voice was different now, nervous, desperate. "Look, the funeral is done. The sister is being handled. She's a non-issue, a cripple with no funds." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "I can have the papers ready by Friday," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We can strip the assets, the patents, the real estate, the inventory. I don't care about the brand legacy. I need the liquidity. $50 million is the buyout price we discussed." My breath hitched. $50 million Thorne Pharmaceuticals was worth triple that, even with the recent stock dip. "Yes," Sterling said. "We sell it all to Vortex Corp. Let them gut it. I just want my payout before the board realizes how deep the debt hole actually is." Vortex Corp. The name hit me like a physical blow. Vortex was our biggest rival, a soulless conglomerate known for buying family-owned pharmaceutical companies, shutting down their research divisions, and hiking the prices of life-saving drugs by 500%. Grandma had spent her life fighting them. She had called them vultures in suits. Sterling was going to sell our family legacy to the enemy. He wasn't just kicking me out. He was burning everything down to cover his own failures. I backed away from the grate, my heart hammering against my ribs. I retreated into the darkness of the basement, the damp air clinging to my skin. I had 48 hours before I was thrown onto the street. I had no money, no allies, and hands that couldn't even make a fist. But as I sat back down on that lumpy cot, the despair began to shift into something else, something colder. Sterling thought I was broken. He thought I was just a tragic footnote in his success story. He had forgotten that before my hands were ruined, I was a scientist. I knew how to observe. I knew how to analyze variables. And I knew that every volatile reaction began with a single spark. I looked at the ceiling, imagining Sterling pacing in the study above, thinking he had won. "Enjoy your whiskey, brother," I whispered to the darkness, "because you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The cold in the butler's quarters was not just atmospheric, it was a weapon. I lay on the thin mattress, staring up at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the silence of the house that was supposed to be my heritage. My hands throbbed with a persistent, rhythmic ache, a reminder of the nerves that had been severed and stitched back together, never to function quite the same way again. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames of the lab, or worse, the indifferent look on Sterling's face as he tossed me aside like expired medicine. My mind drifted back to the woman who had built this empire, not my father, who had maintained it with gentle hands, but his mother, Grandma Alara. She had been a force of nature, a woman who wore lab coats more often than ball gowns and smelled of antiseptic and peppermint rather than expensive perfume. She was the true architect of Thorne Pharmaceuticals. I remembered sitting on her lap when I was 6 years old, tracing the calluses on her palms. She had told me that soft hands were for people who had never built anything. "Callista," she had said, her voice raspy from decades of inhaling chemical fumes before safety regulations were strict. "Never let the money fool you. The money is just the exhaust. The engine is the work. If you forget the work, the car stops running." That memory triggered another, more recent one. It was from 4 days ago, moments before the massive stroke stole my father's ability to speak, and eventually, his life. He had been agitated, gripping my splinted wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were wide, desperate, trying to convey a message that his failing tongue could not quite form. He had pulled me close, his breath rattling in his chest, and whispered a single, lucid sentence that I had dismissed as delirium until this very moment. "When you think you have nothing," he had wheezed, "go back to the source." The source. For the last few days, I had assumed he meant the laboratory. the place where our family's fortune was brewed in beakers and centrifuges. But the lab was gone, a charred skeleton of steel and glass, and I was barred from the company premises. But lying there in the dark, shivering under a thin wool blanket, I realized Dad had not been talking about the company. He was talking about the family, the origin, the attic. It was where Grandma Alara had spent her final years after she retired, tinkering with formulas in a makeshift workspace because she claimed the main lab had become too sterile and full of lawyers. It was where we used to play hide-and-seek when I was a child. It was the source. I sat up, the movement sending a jolt of pain up my forearms. I had to move. If Sterling caught me roaming the upper floors, he would likely throw me out onto the street immediately. 48-hour grace period be damned. But I had nothing left to lose. I slipped out of the basement room. The house was pitch black. Sterling had likely turned off the corridor lights to save electricity, or perhaps just to make my life harder. I moved like a ghost, hugging the walls, navigating by memory. The grand staircase groaned under my weight, every creak sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. I froze on the landing, heart hammering, but the door to the master suite remained closed. Sterling and Mallory were likely asleep, dreaming of the millions they would make selling off my birthright. I climbed the narrow servants' stairs to the 3rd floor, and then the pull-down ladder to the attic. This was the hardest part. My hands could barely grip the rungs. I had to hook my elbows over the wood and haul myself up, inch by agonizing inch, biting my lip until I tasted blood to keep from crying out. When I finally rolled onto the dusty floorboards of the attic, I was gasping for air, sweat cooling rapidly on my skin. The attic smelled of cedar, old paper, and the faint, metallic tang of dried herbs. Moonlight filtered through the singular round window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I crawled toward the far wall, toward the old brick fireplace that had been boarded up decades ago. This had been Grandma's favorite spot. She used to sit in a wingback chair right here, writing in her journals while I played with wooden blocks on the rug. "The source," I whispered. I reached out to the hearth. The bricks were cold and rough. I remembered a game we played. She would hide a piece of candy, and I had to find the loose stone. It had been a game then. Now, it felt like a lifeline. I ran my numb fingertips over the masonry near the base of the fireplace. 3rd row up, 2nd from the left. It moved. I wedged the edge of my rigid hand brace into the gap and pried. It took all my strength, and a fresh wave of pain washed over me, but the brick slid out with a heavy scrape. Behind it lay a hollow space, dark and covered in cobwebs. I reached in, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a box. It was an old biscuit tin, rusted at the corners, heavy and unassuming. It was exactly the kind of thing Grandma would use to store something priceless. To her, value wasn't about gold leaf or diamonds. It was about utility. I sat back against the wall and pried the lid open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a thick, leather-bound book and a stack of yellowed envelopes. I unfolded the cloth. The book was a diary, its cover worn smooth by constant handling. I opened it to the first page. Grandma's handwriting was sharp, angular, and hurried, as if her thoughts were always racing ahead of her pen. October 14th, 1992. The lawyers tell me I need to protect the assets. They want trusts, offshore accounts, tax shelters. They see a fortune. I see a responsibility. My son has a good heart, but he is too soft. And his son, Sterling, there is a hunger in that boy that worries me. He looks at the medicine and sees only the price tag. If the day comes when this family forgets why we started, I need a fail-safe, a mechanism to ensure the work survives the greed. I turned the page, my breath hitching. She had seen this coming. 30 years ago, she had seen the seeds of Sterling's avarice. I picked up the bundle of letters. They were correspondence between Grandma and a man named Arthur Vance, the father of our current family lawyer. I scanned the dates. They spanned a decade. They detailed the creation of a specific legal framework, a shadow clause, in the company charter that superseded standard inheritance laws. Dear Alara, I have drafted the papers as requested. The inheritance rule is unconventional, certainly, but legally binding if the conditions are met. It relies entirely on the beneficiary possessing the specific knowledge contained in your personal journals, without the context of the formulas. The clause is invisible. It is a puzzle that only a true chemist, a true Thorne, could solve. I went back to the diary. It wasn't just a memoir. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it was a lab notebook disguised as a journal. Interspersed with complaints about her hip pain and notes about the garden were complex chemical equations, sketches of molecular structures, and detailed observations about drug interactions. But there was something else. On every 10th page, there was a sequence of numbers highlighted in red ink. At first glance, they looked like dates or batch numbers, but to me, they looked like coordinates, or perhaps weights. I was so engrossed in the reading that I didn't notice the temperature dropping until I saw my own breath misting in the flashlight beam. Suddenly, the single bulb hanging from the attic rafter flickered and died. Total darkness. I froze. Had the bulb burned out? Then I heard the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette below stop. The silence deepened. The house hadn't just lost a light, it had lost power. I scrambled to the attic window and looked down. The garden lights were out. The security gate was dark. But looking across the lawn, I could see the warm glow of the guest house where Sterling and Mallory were temporarily staying while they renovated the master suite. They had power. They had cut the main breaker to the house. Petty, I hissed, wrapping my coat tighter around myself. You want to freeze me out. I fumbled in the dark, gathering the diary and the letters, shoving them deep into the inside pocket of my coat. I couldn't stay here. The attic would be freezing in an hour. I had to get back to the basement, where at least the residual heat from the boiler, if it hadn't been cut too, might keep me alive. I made my way back down the ladder, moving purely by feel. The house was a tomb. I reached the ground floor and crept toward the kitchen, hoping to find a bottle of water. A tap on the glass of the solarium door made me jump, nearly screaming. I spun around, pressing my back against the counter. A flashlight beam danced outside the glass, and then a familiar, weathered face pressed against the pane. It was Mr. Harlan. He had been the groundskeeper at Thorne Manor since before I was born. He was 70 years old, with hands like tree bark and a back permanently stooped from tending Grandma's medicinal garden. Sterling had fired him this morning, I recalled. I unlocked the side door with trembling fingers. Mr. Harlan slipped inside, shaking rain from his poncho. He carried a thermos and a heavy canvas bag. Miss Callista, he whispered, his voice rough with concern. I saw the lights go out. I knew that boy would try something nasty. Mr. Harlan, you shouldn't be here, I said, though I was so relieved to see a friendly face I could have wept. If Sterling sees you, let him see, the old man grunted. He fired me, didn't he? I don't answer to him. Here, he pressed the thermos into my hands. Hot broth, and some bread. You look like you haven't eaten in 3 days. I uncapped the thermos and drank greedily. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away some of the chill. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just listen. Mr. Harlan leaned in closer, his eyes darting to the doorway leading to the main hall. I was packing up my tools in the shed, the ventilation from the study vents right out there. I heard them. Sterling. Him and that wife of his. They are tearing the master study apart. Miss Callista, pulling books off shelves, ripping up the carpet. He kept screaming about a key. My hand went instinctively to the diary in my pocket. A key. The platinum key. Mr. Harlan clarified. He was on the phone with the bank, yelling that he needs the platinum key to access the safety deposit box where the real assets are kept. He thinks your father hid it in the study. I frowned. We don't have a safety deposit box that requires a key. Dad used biometrics for everything. That is what he said. Platinum key. Mr. Harlan squeezed my shoulder gently. Be careful, child. He is desperate. He owes money to bad people. I heard him mention a deadline. 2 days. 2 days, I repeated. The same time he gave me to leave. Mr. Harlan nodded. He needs whatever is in that box to pay them off. If he doesn't find it, he'll burn this place down trying, I finished. I have to go. Mr. Harlan said, stepping back toward the rain. I'll keep a watch from the gatehouse, if you need me. Hang a red cloth in the basement window. He slipped out into the storm, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen. I stood there, the taste of chicken broth on my tongue, my mind racing. Platinum key. Sterling was looking for a physical object, a piece of metal. He was tearing up the floorboards and destroying the library because he interpreted things literally. He was a businessman, not a scientist. I pulled the diary out of my pocket and clicked on the small pen light I kept on my keychain, thankfully. I still had that. I turned the pages, scanning the red ink numbers again. Platinum. I closed my eyes. The periodic table floating in my mind's eye, as vivid as a photograph. I had memorized it when I was 5. Platinum, symbol PT, atomic number 78, atomic weight 195.08. I looked at the diary, page 78. I turned to it. The page appeared to be a standard entry about cultivating foxglove for digitalis extraction, but down at the bottom, there was a series of numbers written in the margin, almost indistinguishable from the botanical measurements. 78, 195, 08, 2024. It wasn't a key you held in your hand. It was a cipher. The platinum key was the code to the vault, or perhaps the password to a digital file, and Grandma had hidden it under the element that represented endurance, resistance to corrosion, and high value. Sterling was looking for silver and gold. He was looking for a physical key to a kingdom he didn't understand. But Grandma had left the map to the treasure in the one language he had never bothered to learn: science. A cold smile touched my lips. The pain in my hands seemed to recede, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. You're looking for metal. Sterling, I whispered to the empty room. But the key is in the chemistry. I had the diary. I had the code. And I had the letters proving that the person who held these things was the true heir. But I needed legal power to enforce it. I needed Arthur Vance's son. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. In 5 hours. The business world would wake up, and in 5 hours, I would stop being the victim. I retreated to the basement, not to sleep, but to study. I had 48 hours to decode the rest of Grandma's legacy before Sterling sold it for scrap. The lesson in humility he talked about. He was right. Someone was about to learn a very painful lesson, but it wasn't going to be me. The morning sun had not yet breached the horizon when the transformation of Thorn Manor began, but the noise was enough to wake the dead. From my narrow cot in the butler's quarters, I heard the heavy thud of furniture being moved and the sharp clatter of catering crates being stacked in the foyer. Sterling was not wasting a single second of his 48-hour deadline. He called it a memorial service for our parents, a somber gathering to honor the legacy of the Thorn dynasty, but as I would soon discover, the only thing being buried that night was my dignity. By 5 p.m, the house smelled of imported lilies and expensive greed. The scent was suffocating, filtering down through the floorboards to my damp sanctuary. I had spent the day decoding more of Grandma's journal, cross-referencing her chemical shorthand with the letters from the 90s. But my focus was shattered when the door to my room banged open. Mallory stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light. She held a black dress on a hanger, her nose wrinkled as if she had stepped into a sewer. "Get up, Callista," she ordered, tossing the garment onto my legs. "We are short-handed. The staffing agency sent 2 servers instead of 5, and Sterling refuses to pay rush fees. You are going to fill in." I looked at the dress. It was a simple black maid's uniform, the kind with a white collar that scratched the neck. It was a uniform for help, not for the daughter of the house. "I am not a waitress, Mallory," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "And even if I were, I cannot hold a tray. You know this." Mallory stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. She leaned down, her face inches from mine, smelling of mint and malice. You are living under our roof for free. You are eating our food. Tonight, you earn your keep. Sterling wants the investors to see that we are taking care of you, that you are involved. It plays well for the sympathy vote. Just pass around napkins if you are too useless to hold a glass, but you will be upstairs in 20 minutes, or I will have security drag you out to the curb right now." She turned and left, leaving the door wide open. I put on the dress. It was tight in the shoulders and loose at the waist, likely borrowed from one of the former maids. As I buttoned the collar, I looked at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the sink. My face was pale, my eyes dark-circled, and the carbon fiber braces on my hands looked grotesque against the delicate fabric. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to be, a broken thing. When I ascended the stairs, the memorial was in full swing. The house was unrecognizable. The somber drapes had been pulled back, and the crystal chandeliers were blazing. A jazz quartet played soft, upbeat tunes in the corner of the ballroom, hardly appropriate for a funeral reception. The room was filled with men in dark suits and women in cocktail dresses, holding flutes of champagne and laughing. These were not friends. They were sharks. I recognized faces from the business pages: hedge fund managers, liquidation specialists, and right in the center, the delegation from Vortex Corp. They circled Sterling like admirers, but their eyes were cold, calculating the value of the furniture and the art on the walls. Sterling spotted me immediately. He excused himself from a conversation with a short, balding man and strode over to me. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "Glad you decided to join the real world," he hissed, steering me toward a catering table. He picked up a heavy silver tray laden with crystal glasses of red wine. "Here, circulate. Make yourself useful." "Sterling, I can't," I whispered, pulling back. "My nerves. I can't feel my fingers properly. I will drop it." "Then don't drop it," he said, jamming the tray into my hands. The weight was immediate and agonizing. Fire shot up my wrists, radiating to my elbows. I gritted my teeth, forcing my muscles to lock, using the friction of the braces to keep the tray steady. "If you spill a drop, Callista, I swear I will make sure you never see a dime of support from this family again. Now smile. Show them you are happy to serve your betters." He shoved me forward. I stumbled but caught my balance, the wine sloshing dangerously near the rims. I began to walk through the crowd. It was a gauntlet of humiliation. I offered wine to men who used to bounce me on their knees when I was a child. They looked at me, then at my uniform, then at the tray. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others, the newer associates, looked at me with pity. "Is that not the daughter?" I heard a woman whisper. "The one who blew up the lab." Her companion replied, "Sad. Sterling says she is mentally unstable. He is a saint for keeping her around." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Focus. I told myself. Observation. Hypothesis. Conclusion. The hypothesis was that Sterling was selling the company tonight. The observation was the Vortex Corp representatives huddled in the corner with blueprints of our manufacturing plant. The conclusion was that I had to survive this night to stop him. I made my way toward the back of the room, intending to hide in the shadow of the grand piano. My arms were screaming in pain. The tray felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sweat trickled down my spine. "Oh, look who it is," a voice drawled. Mallory blocked my path. She was wearing a scarlet dress that looked like a fresh wound against the black and white of the room. She held court with 3 wives of potential investors. "Ladies, this is Callista," Mallory announced, her voice pitched perfectly to carry over the jazz music. "Our little charity project. She insists on helping out. It gives her a sense of purpose, doesn't it, dear?" I stared at her. My jaw locked. "I'm just passing through. Mallory?" "Nonsense. Mr. Henderson over there looks thirsty," she said, pointing to a heavy-set man standing near the fireplace, the vice president of Vortex Corp. "Go serve him, now." I took a step forward. Mallory moved. It was subtle, a motion that would look accidental to anyone not paying attention. She shifted her weight and extended her foot just as I passed. My orthopedic shoe caught on her heel. Time seemed to slow down. I felt my center of gravity shift. I tried to correct, tried to grab the edge of a nearby table, but my hands, my useless, plastic-encased hands, refused to obey. The tray tipped. Gravity took over. I crashed to the floor, my knees slamming into the hardwood. The silver tray hit the ground with the sound of a thunderclap. 12 crystal glasses shattered instantly, and a wave of dark, crimson Cabernet Sauvignon launched into the air, splashing directly onto the pristine white suit of the vice president of Vortex Corp. The music stopped. The laughter died. The room went silent. Save for the dripping of wine, I lay amidst the broken glass, a shard slicing through my stocking and into my shin. The pain was sharp, but the shame was a physical weight, pressing me into the floor. "You clumsy idiot!" Sterling's voice boomed across the room. He marched toward me, his face twisted in a mask of performative outrage. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't offer a hand. He stood over me, looking down like I was a stain on his reputation. "I told you," he shouted, gesturing to the silent crowd. "I told you she was incompetent. Look at this mess. Mr. Henderson, I am so sorry. My sister has difficulties." "I tripped," I stammered, trying to push myself up, but my hands slipped on the wet floor. I fell back down, glass crunching under my palms. "You didn't trip," Sterling sneered. "You are just useless. You are a disgrace to the Thorne family name. Look at you, crawling on the floor like a child. You can't even carry a tray. And you thought you could run a pharmaceutical company. This is why Mom and Dad left everything to me. Because you destroy everything you touch." Tears hot and stinging welled in my eyes. Not from the pain in my leg, or the ache in my arms, but from the sheer exposure of it. He was stripping me bare in front of the very people I needed to respect me. I looked up, searching for a friendly face, anyone who would step in. My eyes locked with a figure standing by the heavy velvet curtains near the entrance. It was Arthur Vance, the family lawyer. He held a glass of water, his face unreadable. He saw me on the floor. He saw Mallory smirking behind her hand. He saw Sterling's vein popping in his forehead. "Please," I thought, "help me." Vance did not move. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of what looked like disappointment crossing his features. Then, he turned his back and walked out of the room. My heart shattered louder than the wine glasses. Even Vance, the man who had written the letters to Grandma, had abandoned me. I was truly alone. "Get out of my sight," Sterling spat. "Go back to your hole in the basement, and take this with you." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled furiously. He ripped the check out and crumpled it into a ball. Throwing it at my head, it bounced off my forehead and landed in a puddle of wine. $500, he announced. "Consider it your severance package, your final charity. Now get out before I have security throw you out." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I reached out with my trembling, brace-encased fingers and picked up the soggy ball of paper. I used the leg of the piano to pull myself to my feet. Blood trickled down my shin, staining the white sock of my orthopedics. I limped past the staring guests, past Mallory who was pretending to comfort the soaked Vortex executive, and out the service door. I didn't stop until I reached the basement. I locked the door, slid down the wall, and sat in the darkness, shaking. $500. That was the value Sterling placed on my life. That was the price of our bloodline. I looked at the check. The ink was running, bleeding into the paper. It looked like a surrender flag. "No," I whispered. My voice sounded strange in the small room, guttural. Raw. I wasn't going to surrender. The shame that had been burning my cheeks began to cool, hardening into something dense and heavy, something like iron. I crawled over to the loose floorboard where I had hidden the diary. I pulled it out, my hands leaving bloody smears on the leather cover. I didn't care. I opened it, flipping past the chemical formulas, past the gardening tips, searching for something I had glanced at earlier but hadn't fully absorbed. I found it on page 112, July 4th, 1980. My son thinks he is ready to lead. He thinks the money is infinite. I have decided to teach him a lesson. I have instructed Arthur to freeze the accounts. I have told the staff to go on leave. We will live for 1 month on the budget of a factory floor worker. He must understand that the Thorn name is not a credit card. It is a promise. I read on. He cried. He raged. But eventually, he worked. He planted the winter wheat with me. He learned. But I fear for the next generation. If the hunger returns, if the humility is lost, we must be ready to burn the field to save the soil. Burn the field to save the soil. Sterling hadn't learned the lesson. He thought the lesson in humility was for me. But Grandma had designed it for him. She knew a day might come when a thorn would become a parasite. I turned the page. Taped to the back cover was a business card, yellowed with age. It didn't have a law firm logo. It just had a name, Arthur Vance, and a handwritten number. Below it, in Grandma's jagged script, was a note. For the day the field needs burning, call this line. It does not ring at the office. It rings at his home. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was now midnight. The party upstairs was dying down. I wiped the blood from my leg with the hem of the maid's dress. I picked up my cell phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I was about to initiate a war I wasn't sure I could win. Sterling had the money, the power, and the perception of the world. I had a diary, a crippled body, and a $500 check. But I also had the truth. I dialed the number. It wasn't the number for the fancy downtown firm Vance worked at. It was an old landline area code. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then a click. I was wondering when you would call. Callista, a voice said. It wasn't the cold, professional voice of a lawyer. It was tired, grave, and expecting me. You saw me tonight, I said, my voice cracking. You saw what he did. I saw a man digging his own grave, Vance replied. And I saw a woman who finally looked angry enough to pick up the shovel. Do not come to the office tomorrow. Sterling has eyes there. Meet me at the diner on 4th and Elm. The one your father used to sneak out to for pancakes. 6 in the morning. Why didn't you help me? I asked, a tear finally escaping. Because, Vance said softly, for the platinum key to turn, the hand holding it must be steady. I needed to know if you were broken, Callista, or if you were just bending. Now I know. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Upstairs, I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. The last guest was gone. Sterling was probably pouring himself a celebratory drink, thinking he had won. I looked at my hands. They were still trembling, but not from weakness. They were vibrating with the potential energy of a reaction waiting to happen. Lesson in humility, I whispered to the empty room. Class is in session. Sterling. The rain had tapered off into a thick, clinging mist that obscured the Seattle skyline as I slipped out of the servants' entrance of Thorn Manor. It was 5:30 in the morning. The house was a sleeping beast, its windows dark and lifeless, save for the faint orange glow from the security lights patrolling the perimeter. I kept my head down, pulling the hood of my oversized raincoat low to hide my face. Sterling had installed new cameras last week, ostensibly for safety, but I knew they were to monitor me. I moved through the blind spots I had mapped out during my sleepless nights, skirting the hedgerows until I reached the rusted service gate that Mr. Harlan had left unlocked for me. My destination was the Rusty Spoon, a diner on 4th and Elm that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. It was a place of peeling vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt ambition. It was also the last place anyone would look for a thorn. My father used to bring me here on Sunday mornings when Sterling was at fencing practice. He said he liked the pancakes because they didn't taste like pretension. I pushed open the door, the bell jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety in my stomach. The diner was nearly empty, occupied only by a truck driver nursing a mug of tea and a waitress who looked like she needed a nap more than a tip, and Arthur Vance. He was sitting in the back booth, far away from the window. He wasn't wearing his usual pristine suit. Instead, he wore a worn brown leather jacket and a flat cap. Looking more like a retired dock worker than one of the city's most powerful estate attorneys, he had a manila folder on the table in front of him. I slid into the booth opposite him. My hands, hidden in my pockets, were shaking. Not from the cold this time, but from the realization that I was conspiring against my own brother. "You look like hell, Callista," Vance said quietly, signaling the waitress to bring coffee. "I feel like it," I replied, my voice rough. "Sterling gave me 48 hours. I have about 30 left." "He's moving faster than I anticipated," Vance muttered, tapping the folder. "He's panicked. That makes him dangerous, but it also makes him sloppy." "Why did you wait for me to call?" I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since last night. "You could have told me about the will. You could have stopped him at the funeral." Vance sighed, taking a sip of his black coffee. "Because the will isn't just a document. Callista, it's a test. Your grandmother set it up, and your parents enforced it. The lesson in humility isn't just a phrase, it's a legal trigger. If I had intervened before you showed the initiative to fight, before you found the diary, the clause wouldn't have activated. The estate would have gone into a blind trust managed by the bank, and Sterling would have eventually found a way to drain it dry." He opened the folder and pulled out a tablet. "You need to see this. It was recorded 3 months ago." He pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing my parents sitting on the sofa in the master study. They looked terrible. My father's face was gaunt, his skin gray. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes red-rimmed. Seeing them alive, moving, speaking, felt like a punch to the gut. I bit my lip to keep from sobbing. "Callista," my father began, his voice raspy but firm. "If you are watching this, then we are gone. And if Arthur is showing you this, it means Sterling has done exactly what we feared." He paused, coughing into a handkerchief. Mother rubbed his back gently. "We know," Mother said, looking directly into the camera. "We know about the embezzlement. We know Sterling has been siphoning money from the RD budget to cover his losses in the futures market. He thinks he's clever, hiding it under consulting fees. But we saw the ledgers." My eyes went wide. I stared at Vance. Embezzlement. But Sterling always said the company was struggling because of market trends. "Sterling lied," Vance said grimly. "He's been gambling with the company's operating capital for 2 years. He's lost millions." On the screen, my father continued. "We confronted him. He denied it. He threatened to have us declared incompetent if we went to the board. He broke our hearts. Callista. But we couldn't cut him off completely. Not publicly. It would destroy the stock price and ruin everything your grandmother built." "So," Mother said, her voice trembling, "we are invoking the shadow clause. We have drafted a decoy will the one Sterling has seen. It leaves everything to him. It's bait. We need him to believe he has won, so he exposes his true nature. But the real inheritance that belongs to the one who holds the history—" "The diary," I whispered. "The diary," Vance confirmed, pausing the video. "It's not just a book. Under the terms of the original company charter your grandmother wrote, the keeper of the formulas is the true head of the Thorne family. But we needed physical proof that the diary still existed, and that it was in the hands of a worthy successor, by finding it and by bringing it to me. You have legally claimed your position." I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy leather-bound book. I placed it on the table between us. It looked ancient and powerful sitting there on the formica surface. Vance stared at it, his expression softening into something like reverence. He reached out and touched the cover. "I haven't seen this since Alara passed. I thought it was lost." "It was under the floorboards," I said, "just like she told me in my dreams." Vance opened the book, flipping to the back where the platinum key cipher was written. He nodded slowly. "This is it. This is the missing piece. With this, I can prove that the decoy Will Sterling is holding is null and void." "So we can stop him?" I asked, hope flaring in my chest. "We can kick him out." Not yet, Vance warned, closing the book. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. That is the trap. We have to let Sterling walk into it. He needs to officially accept the assets in front of witnesses. Once he signs the acceptance of the decoy will, he also accepts the debts attached to it. Debts. Sterling isn't just selling the company because he's greedy. Callista. Vance leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. He's selling it because he's terrified. He owes $15 million to a loan shark syndicate in Macau. They've given him until the end of the month to pay up. That's why he's rushing the sale to Vortex Corp. He needs the cash to save his life. I sat back, stunned. My brother wasn't just a corporate shark. He was a desperate gambler and way over his head. If we reveal our hand now, Vance continued, Sterling will flee. He'll disappear. And the creditors will come after the estate after you. We need him to take legal responsibility for the debt. We need him to sign the papers tomorrow thinking he's getting the billions, only to realize he's inherited his own mistakes. The plan was brutal. It was efficient. It was exactly the kind of trap Grandma Ilara would have set. What do I do until then? I asked. You go back, Vance said. You play the victim. You let him think he's crushed you. Make him feel safe. Arrogance is his weakness. Feed it. He slid the diary back to me. Keep this safe. Bring it to the reading tomorrow. It's your sword and your shield. I took the book, tucking it back into my bag. I felt different. Walking into the diner, I had been a fugitive. Now, I was a general returning to the front lines. Thank you, Arthur, I said. Don't thank me yet, he replied, putting on his glasses. The hard part is just beginning. Survive the next 24 hours. Callista. I left the diner and made my way back to Thorn Manor. The sun had risen, casting long, pale shadows across the estate. I slipped back in through the service gate, my heart pounding. I expected to find the house quiet, but as I entered the kitchen, I smelled smoke. Not the smell of cooking, but the acrid scent of burning paper and paint. I followed the smell to the main living room. Sterling was standing by the massive stone fireplace. He was tossing things into the flames. He held a canvas in his hand, a painting I had done when I was 18. A watercolor of the medicinal garden in bloom. It was one of the few things I had been proud of before my hands were ruined. Sterling, I gasped. Stepping into the room, he turned, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Ah, the prodigal sister returns. Where have you been wandering the streets looking for a cardboard box to live in? He tossed the painting into the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the vibrant colors turning to ash in seconds. That was mine, I said, my voice trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out. But I remembered Vance's words, play the victim, feed his arrogance. It was trash, Sterling said, dusting off his hands. I'm decluttering. If you're going to leave, you can't leave your junk behind. I'm doing you a favor. He picked up another canvas, a portrait I had sketched of Mom. No, I pleaded, dropping to my knees. Please, Sterling, not that one. I'll leave. I promise. Just let me keep that. Sterling laughed. It was a cold, barking sound. Begging suits you. Callista, finally learning your place. He held the portrait over the flames, watching me squirm. Tell you what, you admit it. Admit you're jealous. Admit you're useless. Say it. I looked at the floor, forcing tears into my eyes. I dug my fingernails into my palms until it hurt. I'm jealous, I choked out. I'm useless. You won. Sterling, you always win. He smirked, satisfied. He lowered the portrait but didn't give it to me. Instead, he dropped it on the floor and stepped on it with his polished shoe, grinding his heel into Mom's face. Pathetic, he muttered. Get out of my sight. Tomorrow morning at 9. You show up at the lawyer's office to sign away your rights. If you're late, I burn the rest of your things. Understand? Yes, I whispered. I understand. I stood up, clutching my bag with the diary against my chest. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there by the fire, king of the ashes. He thought he had broken me. He thought the fire was destroying my past. He didn't know that inside my bag, I held the match that would burn his future to the ground. I went back to the basement. The image of his heel on Mom's face burned into my retinas. I sat on the cot and waited. The clock ticked. Every second brought me closer to 9 a.m., closer to justice. The peace of the morning did not last. By 10 o'clock, the driveway of Thorn Manor, usually a quiet gravel ribbon winding through the spruce trees, resembled a commercial parking lot. A fleet of black SUVs and white panel vans had arrived, their engines idling with a low, aggressive rumble that vibrated through the foundation of the house. I watched from the narrow window of the basement, my heart sinking. Sterling wasn't waiting for the ink to dry on any legal documents. He was carving up the carcass of our family legacy while it was still warm. I ascended the stairs, keeping to the shadows of the service hallway. The house was filled with strangers. Men and women in sharp business suits moved through the rooms with clipboards and tablets, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. They weren't mourning, they were calculating. They pointed at the tapestries, the chandeliers, and the hand-carved molding like butchers identifying the choicest cuts of meat. Sterling was at the center of it all, playing the gracious host to the pillagers. He walked alongside a short, thick-set man I recognized as the lead appraiser from the city's largest auction house. "The rug is 16th century Persian," Sterling was saying, his voice loud and boastful. "My grandfather brought it back from an expedition, valued at $80,000 10 years ago. I assume inflation has been kind to us." The appraiser nodded, tapping on his screen. "We can start the bidding at $100,000. It will fly off the block." "Excellent," Sterling grinned, rubbing his hands together. "Tag it. Ship it out today if possible." I felt a wave of nausea. That rug was where my mother used to sit and read to us on rainy Sundays. It wasn't just wool and dye. It was the landscape of my childhood. I moved further into the house, trying to remain invisible, but it was impossible to ignore the desecration. Mallory was in the music room, armed with a roll of neon orange stickers that read, "Sold." She moved with a manic energy, slapping stickers onto vases, sculptures, and paintings. Then, she stopped in front of the Steinway grand piano. My breath hitched. That piano was my soul before the laboratory took my hands. I had spent thousands of hours on that bench, pouring my teenage angst, my joy, and my sorrow into the ivory keys. It was a gift from Grandma Alara for my 16th birthday. Mallory ran a manicured hand over the glossy black lid. "This thing takes up too much space," she muttered to an assistant trailing behind her. "Get rid of it. $5,000 to whoever hauls it away by noon." 5,000. I couldn't stop myself. I stepped out from behind the pillar. "That piano is worth 60,000, Mallory, and it is not just furniture. It is mine." Mallory turned, her eyes narrowing. She looked me up and down, sneering at my plain clothes and the brace on my arm. "Oh, look, the ghost of the basement speaks. Correction, Callista. It was yours. Now it is an asset, and assets are liquid. Besides," she laughed. A brittle, cruel sound. "What are you going to do with it? You can't even play chopsticks anymore with those claws." The cruelty of her words was breathless. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to scrub every trace of Callista Thorne from the history of this house. I wanted to scream, to throw myself over the piano and protect it, but I froze. I saw the camera lens in the corner of the ceiling, a small black dome that my father had installed 2 years ago after a break-in scare. Sterling thought they were just for show, or perhaps he had forgotten they were there. But I knew they were recording, and I knew Arthur Vance was watching. "Let them dig their hole," Vance had said. I swallowed my rage, turning it into cold resolve. "You are selling memories, Mallory. You will regret this." "The only thing I regret is that we didn't sell this dusty museum sooner," she retorted, slapping a sold sticker right onto the gold Steinway logo. I turned away, unable to watch. I needed fresh air. I needed to breathe. I walked out through the French doors onto the back terrace, hoping the garden would offer some sanctuary, but the nightmare had followed me outside. A group of men in hard hats were standing in the middle of Grandma's medicinal garden. They were holding blueprints and pointing at the ground. One of them, a slick-looking man in a gray suit, who I assumed was from Vortex Corp., was gesturing wildly at the center of the garden. "We need to level this whole section," the Vortex man said, his voice carrying over the wind. "The infinity pool will go right here, extending over the cliff edge. It will be a major selling point for the estate when we flip it." "Level it." Sterling's voice joined them. He walked down the stone steps, a glass of champagne in hand. "Do whatever you want. Just make sure the quote for the excavation is on my desk by tonight." My heart hammered against my ribs. They were standing under the great ginkgo tree. It was over 200 years old. Grandma had built the entire garden around it. She believed its roots held the network of the entire ecosystem together. "You want to cut down the ginkgo?" I gasped, rushing down the steps. "Sterling, you can't. That tree is older than this house." Sterling rolled his eyes. "It's a tree. Callista. It drops leaves in the pool. It goes." "It's a heritage species," I argued, my voice rising. "Grandma said it was the heart of the land. If you kill it, you kill the soil. I am selling the dirt. Callista, not the soul." Sterling spat. "Go back inside." Just then, a figure emerged from the tool shed. It was Mr. Harlan. He was holding a pair of shears, but he held them like a weapon. His face was red with exertion and fury. "You touched that tree," the old man shouted, stepping between the Vortex architect and the trunk of the ginkgo. "And you will have to go through me first. Mr. Harlan." Sterling sighed, looking bored. "I thought I fired you yesterday. I don't take orders from a boy who doesn't know the difference between a weed and a wonder." "Mr." Harlan growled. He stood his ground, a frail shield against the machinery of greed. "Your grandmother planted the seedlings around this tree with her own hands. This ground is sacred." "This ground is property," the Vortex man interjected, checking his watch. "Mr. Thorne, we are on a schedule, if this squatter is going to be a problem." "He won't be," Sterling said, his face darkening. He marched up to Mr. Harlan. "Get out of the way, old man. You are trespassing." "I am protecting this family's honor since you won't." "Mr. Harlan yelled. Sterling didn't hesitate. He reached out and shoved the 70-year-old man. It wasn't a playful push. It was a violent, angry thrust. "Mr. Harlan stumbled back, his foot catching on a root, and he fell hard onto the dirt path. "No," I screamed. I ran forward, placing myself between Sterling and the fallen gardener. I knelt down to help Mr. Harlan, who was gasping for breath, clutching his chest. "You monster!" I looked up at Sterling, my vision blurring with tears. "He is an old man. You could have killed him." "He is insubordinate," Sterling shouted, his composure finally cracking. The veins in his neck bulged. "And so are you. I am the master of this house. I say what stays and what goes. The tree goes, the old man goes, and you." He stepped toward me, looming over me like a thunderhead. "I am warning you, Sterling," I said, my voice low and shaking. "Back off." "Or what?" he sneered. "You'll scratch me with your plastic hands." He grabbed my shoulder to haul me up. Instinctively, I pulled away. He shoved me, just as he had shoved Mr. Harlan. I wasn't as steady as I used to be. The force of his push sent me reeling backward. I tripped over a stone border and landed heavily on the grass, my bad hand slamming into the earth. A jolt of white-hot lightning shot up my arm, blinding me for a second. "Callista." "Mr." Harlan cried out. Sterling stood over us, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. For a second, he looked terrified of what he had done, but then he saw the Vortex rep watching him. He had to maintain the facade of power. "Look what you made me do," Sterling hissed, blaming me for his own violence. "You forced my hand. Now get him off my property. If I see either of you near this garden again, I will call the police and have you arrested for assault." He turned on his heel and marched back toward the house, gesturing for the Vortex team to follow him. "We can discuss the pool layout in the study, away from the riffraff." I lay on the ground, clutching my throbbing arm. The physical pain was intense, but my mind was racing. I looked up at the corner of the tool shed roof. There, blinking silently, was another one of Dad's security cameras. It had seen everything: the assault on an elderly employee, the assault on a disabled sibling, the threats. I looked at Mr. Harlan. He was sitting up, wiping dirt from his trousers. He wasn't looking at Sterling. He was looking at me with profound sadness. "I am sorry, Miss Callista," he whispered. "I couldn't save the tree." "You saved more than that, Mr. Harlan," I said, gritting my teeth as I helped him stand. "You saved the truth." I spent the next hour helping Mr. Harlan pack his few belongings from the small shed he had used as an office for 40 years. It was heartbreaking to see a lifetime of service reduced to a cardboard box. He packed his pruning shears, a framed photo of him and Grandma Alara, and his almanacs. When we were done, he walked me to the service gate. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red light over the manor. "I have nowhere to go tonight," Mr. Harlan admitted, looking at his feet. "But my daughter in Portland says I can come stay with her next week." "You go to the Motel 6 on the highway," I said, pressing the crumpled $500 check Sterling had thrown at me into his hand. It was the only money I had. "Take this. Stay warm. Order room service." "Miss Callista, I cannot." "Take it," I insisted. "It is dirty money from Sterling, but we will use it for something good. Please." He took the check, his eyes watering. Then, he reached into the deep pocket of his canvas coat and pulled out a small glass jar. Inside were 3 dark, wrinkled seeds. "I saved these from the mother plant last autumn," he said, pressing the jar into my good hand. "This is the Atropa belladonna strain your grandmother developed. The pure line. It is the strongest medicine and the deadliest poison, depending on how you treat it." He closed my fingers around the cold glass. "Keep them safe," he said. "They are the soul of the Thorn legacy. Sterling can build his swimming pool, but he cannot buy the roots. As long as you have the seeds, the garden never truly dies." "I promise," I whispered. "I will plant them again, in better soil." Mr. Harlan squeezed my hand one last time and walked out into the twilight. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. Sterling had stripped the house bare. He had sold the furniture, doomed the garden, and exiled the loyal. He thought he was clearing the deck for his new life. He didn't realize he was just creating a perfect stage for his own downfall. I returned to the basement, my arm aching with a dull, persistent throb. The house was quiet again. The appraisers and architects had gone. I could hear Sterling and Mallory upstairs, celebrating. I heard the pop of a champagne cork. I lay down on my cot, clutching the jar of seeds to my chest. Exhaustion finally overtook the pain. That night, I dreamed. I was back in the attic, but it wasn't dark. It was flooded with warm, golden sunlight. Grandma Alara was sitting in her wingback chair, wearing her lab coat. She looked younger, stronger. She didn't speak. She just looked at me and smiled a conspiratorial, knowing smile. She pointed to the floorboard. Then she pointed to my hands. She didn't see the braces. She didn't see the scars. She saw the hands that could heal. She saw the hands that could build. I woke up with a gasp. The room was pitch black. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I have the footage. It is perfect. See you at 9. It was Vance. I sat up in the darkness. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of a scientist looking at a completed equation. Tomorrow was the reading. Tomorrow. The lesson in humility would finally be taught. And I would be the one holding the chalk. The morning of the will reading arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise, purple and swollen with the threat of another storm. I woke up before the alarm, though in truth, I had not really slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling of the basement, listening to the house settle, knowing that this was the last time I would ever wake up as a guest in my own home. By tonight, I would either be the mistress of Thorn Manor or a homeless woman with a pocket full of seeds. I dressed in the dark. I put on the same black dress I had worn to the funeral. It was simple, unadorned, and frayed slightly at the hem, a garment that screamed, poor relation. I brushed my hair back into a severe bun, exposing the sharp angles of my face. I did not wear makeup. I wanted to look exactly like what Sterling expected, a grieving, broken ghost. I did not ask for a ride. I called a yellow taxi. As the cab idled at the service gate, I looked back at the house one last time. The windows of the master suite were dark, but I knew Sterling and Mallory were already up, likely preening themselves for their coronation. The ride to downtown Seattle was a blur of gray concrete and rain-slicked streets. The driver, a chatty man who smelled of spearmint gum, tried to make small talk about the Mariners game, but I stared out the window, clutching my canvas bag. Inside, wrapped in a nondescript plastic grocery bag, was the leather-bound diary of Grandma Ilara. It rested against my hip, a heavy, silent anchor. I arrived at the offices of Vance, Pendergrass, and Associates at 8:45. It was an old firm, located in a historic brick building in Pioneer Square, far removed from the glass and steel skyscrapers where Sterling did his business. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and old paper. When I stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, I saw that the circus had already arrived. Sterling was standing by the receptionist's desk, checking his reflection in a framed diploma on the wall. He looked like he was about to ring the opening bell at the stock exchange. He wore a navy blue 3-piece suit that I knew for a fact was bespoke. Tailored in Milan, the fabric shimmered under the office lights. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the fluorescent bulbs. He exuded an aura of aggressive vitality, the kind of man who believed the world was a buffet laid out specifically for his appetite. But it was Mallory who made my breath hitch in my throat. She was sitting in one of the leather wingback chairs, scrolling through her phone. She wore a cream-colored dress that cost more than my entire college tuition. But it wasn't the dress that made my blood run cold. It was the necklace. Resting against her collarbone, glittering with a cold, hard fire, was the Aurora diamond. It was a teardrop pendant surrounded by sapphires, a piece my father had commissioned for my mother on their 25th wedding anniversary. Mom had worn it only on special occasions, treating it with a reverence bordering on religious. She kept it in the wall safe behind the painting in the master bedroom. Mallory was wearing it like costume jewelry. I walked toward them, my orthopedic shoes squeaking slightly on the parquet floor. Sterling turned, his smile tight and predatory. "You made it," he said, checking his platinum watch. "I was about to tell them to start without you. Though, honestly, your presence is just a formality." "That necklace," I said, my voice low. I didn't look at him. I looked at Mallory. "That belongs to Mom." Mallory looked up, feigning surprise. Her fingers fluttered up to touch the diamonds. "Oh, this Sterling said I could wear it. It seemed a shame to leave such beautiful things locked up in a dark box. Besides, someone has to represent the family style. You certainly aren't doing it." She looked me up and down, her lip curling in distaste. "You look like you are going to a court hearing for a parking ticket." "Legally," a voice boomed from behind Sterling. "It is still part of the estate inventory until probate is closed. Technically, wearing it constitutes unauthorized use of assets." I looked at the speaker. He was a tall, jagged-looking man with slicked-back gray hair and a suit that looked sharper than a scalpel. He stood next to Sterling like a guard dog. "Relax, Croat," Sterling laughed, slapping the man on the back. "Possession is 9/10 of the law. Isn't that right, Callista? Meet Mr. Marcus Croat." My personal counsel. I brought him along to make sure Vance doesn't try to pull any senile slow-walking maneuvers. We have a schedule to keep. Mr. Croat gave me a nod that was more of a dismissal than a greeting. Ms. Thorne, my client wishes to expedite this process. I trust you will not be an obstruction. I'm just here to listen, I said, gripping my bag tighter. Good girl, Sterling said. Come on, let's get this farce over with so I can sign the transfer papers for Vortex. We filed into the conference room. It was a library-like space, lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal tomes. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Arthur Vance. He looked tired. His tie was slightly askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But his gaze was steady. He did not stand up when we entered. He watched us with the impassive face of a poker player holding a royal flush. Mr. Thorne. Vance nodded. Mrs. Thorne, Callista. Let's skip the pleasantries. Arthur, Sterling said, pulling out the chair at the opposite end of the table and sitting down as if it were a throne. Mallory sat to his right. Mr. Croat to his left. I took the chair nearest the door, isolating myself from them. I have the appraisers coming back at noon to finalize the furniture auction. Just read the damn thing. We are also on a tight timeline regarding the corporate merger. Mr. Croat added, opening his briefcase and clicking a gold pen. We expect the transfer of title for the pharmaceutical holdings to be executed immediately following the reading. Vance looked at Croat over the rim of his reading glasses. The law does not run on your schedule. Mr. Croat, it runs on procedure. Procedure is for people who bill by the hour, Sterling scoffed. Just read it, Vance sighed. He opened a thin folder lying on the table. It contained a single document, perhaps 3 pages long. Very well, Vance said. I will begin with the reading of the Asset Memorandum and Preliminary Distribution Instructions, as drafted by your late parents, Edward and Martha Thorne, 6 months ago. Preliminary. Sterling frowned. Whatever. Does it give me the house and the company? I will read, Vance said, his voice sharpening. Please hold your questions. He cleared his throat. To our children, we leave a legacy defined not by what we accumulated, but by what we valued, in the matter of liquid assets and personal property. Vance paused, his eyes flicking to me for a nanosecond. To our daughter, Callista Thorne, we leave the sum of $0. The room went silent. Even though I knew it was coming, hearing the words spoken aloud felt like a slap. $0. It sounded so final. Sterling let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. He clapped his hand on the table. 0. Did you hear that? Mal, 0. Vance continued, ignoring him. In lieu of financial assets, Callista is to receive the small wooden keepsake box located on the mantel of the library, containing family mementos. We believe she has the internal fortitude to survive without the crutch of wealth. Fortitude, Sterling mocked. Is that what they call being broke these days? Oh, this is rich. This is better than I imagined. To our son, Sterling Thorne, Vance read on, his voice monotone. We grant the immediate, temporary executive authority over all family bank accounts, the title to the Thorne Manor estate, and the controlling interest in Thorne Pharmaceuticals, subject to the conditions of the family charter. Temporary, Mr. Croat interrupted, narrowing his eyes. That language is unusual. It should be permanent transfer. It is standard language for the primary beneficiary during the probate period, Vance lied smoothly. It grants him full operational control, effective immediately. Sterling wasn't listening to the legal nuances. He had heard executive authority and controlling interest, and that was all he needed. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide, nearly hitting Mallory in the face. There it is, Sterling crowed. He looked at me, his eyes shining with malicious triumph. Did you hear that? Callista total control, the house, the company, the money, all of it. He stood up and walked around the table toward me. I sat still, my hands resting on my lap. the brace on my right hand clicking against the wood of the table. "You know," Sterling said, leaning down so his face was level with mine. "I almost feel bad for you. Almost. But then I remember how you used to look at me. Like you were the smart one. Like you were the scientist and I was just the suit. Well, look at the data now. Sister, the data says you are worth exactly $0. Sterling, please," I said softly, playing my part. "I have medical bills. The surgery." "Not my problem," Sterling sneered. "The will is clear. Mom and Dad knew who the strong one was. They knew who could actually lead this family. They called it a lesson in humility in the intro. Didn't they? Well, here is your lesson. Callista, you are nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather money clip. He peeled off 10 $100 bills and tossed them onto the table in front of me. "I am a generous god. Though," he laughed, $1,000. That should be enough to buy a bus ticket to, I don't know, Idaho. Somewhere where nobody knows you burned down a lab." Mallory giggled. "Idaho seems nice. Potatoes suit her." "Take it," Sterling commanded. "Take the money and get out. I don't want to see your face when I sign the Vortex deal this afternoon. You are bad for the brand image." I looked at the money. Green, crisp bills scattered on the mahogany like fallen leaves. I looked at Sterling. He was glowing with arrogance. He was so full of himself that he was practically vibrating. He had taken the bait, swallowed the hook, and was now thanking us for the meal. I slowly reached out, but I didn't take the money. I pushed the bills aside. "I don't want your money. Sterling," I said, my voice gaining a steely edge that caused Mr. Croat to look up from his notes. "Suit yourself," Sterling shrugged. "More for the celebration dinner." He turned back to Vance. "All right, Arthur, give me the pen. Let's sign the transfer papers and get out of here." Vance did not move. He did not reach for a pen. He closed the folder containing the memorandum and placed his hands on top of it. "I am afraid we are not quite done. Mr. Thorne," Vance said. The tone of his voice had changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by the sharp, commanding timbre of a man who had been practicing law since before Sterling was born. "What do you mean?" Sterling asked, annoyed. "You read the will. 0 for her, everything for me, meeting adjourned." "That was the memorandum of understanding," Vance corrected. "It is a document of intent, valid only in the absence of a specific testamentary trigger." "Trigger." Mr. Croat sat up straighter. "What trigger?" I saw the draft documents. There were no contingencies. "You saw the documents filed with the public clerk," Vance said calmly. "However, the Thorne family charter, established by Alara Thorne in 1992, contains a shadow clause, a clause that activates a secondary, superseding last will and testament upon the presentation of a specific family artifact." Sterling blinked. The smile faltered on his lips. "What are you talking about?" "What artifact?" Vance turned his gaze to me. He nodded once, a microscopic gesture. I lifted the canvas bag onto the table. I reached inside and pulled out the rusted tin box first. Sterling frowned, looking confused. Then, I opened the tin and removed the oilcloth bundle. I unfolded the cloth and placed the thick leather-bound diary on the table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. The smell of old paper and dried herbs wafted through the sterile air of the office. "This artifact," I said. Sterling looked at the book. He looked at me. "A book you brought, a dirty old book, to a legal proceeding. Is this a joke?" "This is the personal journal of Alara Thorne," Vance announced, his voice ringing with authority. "And its presence here, in the hands of Callista Thorne, legally nullifies the memorandum I just read." Sterling's face went from confused to purple in the span of a heartbeat. "Nullifies? You can't nullify a will with a diary. This is insanity, Croat. Do something." "Mr." Croat looked rattled. He was flipping through his papers frantically. "I have no record of this. This is irregular." "It is perfectly regular within the private bylaws of Thorne Pharmaceuticals," Vance said. Reaching under his desk, he pulled out a large, heavy metal lockbox. He placed it on the table and spun the combination dial. Click, click, click. The sound was like a gunshot in the room. Vance opened the box and pulled out a thick document bound in blue ribbon. It was sealed with red wax the old way. "This," Vance said, holding up the document, "is the official last will and testament of Edward and Martha Thorne. It has been held in escrow for 20 years, updated annually, and sealed waiting for this moment." Sterling stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "Official, the other one? The $0. A test," Vance said coldly. "A test you have spectacularly failed in the last 10 minutes. "I don't understand," Mallory squeaked, clutching the stolen necklace. "Does this mean we don't get the house?" "It means," I said, speaking up for the first time with my true voice, "that the game is over. Sterling." Sterling slammed his hands on the table, leaning over the diary. "I don't care about your little scavenger hunt. I am the CEO, I am the heir. You can't take this away from me with a magic trick." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Vance ordered. It wasn't a request. "And listen. Because the contents of this document are going to change your life significantly, and not in the way you think." Sterling froze. The arrogance was evaporating, replaced by a dawning, icy fear. He looked at the thick document in Vance's hand, then at the diary, and finally at me, for the first time. He didn't see a cripple. He saw a threat. "Read it," Sterling whispered, his voice shaking. "Read the damn thing." Vance adjusted his glasses. He broke the wax seal. The crackling sound was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. "To my children," Vance began, reading the real words of my parents. And as he spoke, I watched the color drain from my brother's face, drop by drop. The lesson had begun. Arthur Vance held the document with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. The wax seal had crumbled onto the mahogany table like dried blood, signaling the end of the prelude and the beginning of the execution. He unfolded the pages, the heavy parchment crackling in the dead silence of the conference room. I watched Sterling's throat bob as he swallowed, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple despite the air conditioning. Mallory was frozen, her hand still clutching the stolen diamond necklace, her eyes darting between the lawyer and her husband. Vance adjusted his spectacles and looked over the rim at Sterling. "This document," Vance began, his voice devoid of the earlier fatigue, ringing with the steel of absolute authority, "was signed 6 months ago in the presence of 3 independent witnesses, a federal judge, a notary public, and the chief of staff at Seattle Grace Hospital. Its validity is unassailable. Any attempt to contest it will result in immediate countersuits for frivolous litigation. Do you understand, Mr. Croat?" Sterling's bulldog lawyer nodded stiffly, looking pale. "We understand the legal standing. Arthur, read the distribution." Vance looked down at the paper. Article 1, Liquid Assets. Sterling leaned forward, his greed momentarily overcoming his fear. He was like a dog hearing the sound of a can opener. "To our daughter, Callista Thorne," Vance read clearly, enunciating every syllable. "We leave the sum of $0 in liquid currency." Sterling let out a breath he had been holding, a sharp, barking laugh escaping his lips. He slapped the table, triumph surging back into his face. "I told you 0 changed. It is the same as the memo. Oh, Callista, you almost had me worried with your little diary trick, but facts are facts. You get nothing." "Let him finish," I said quietly. My pulse was steady. I watched my brother with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen walking into a trap. Vance did not look up. He continued reading, his voice rising slightly to cut through Sterling's celebration. "We leave her $0 because cash is a static asset. It burns, it fades. It is meaningless compared to responsibility. We do not burden our daughter with the fruit. We entrust her with the tree." Sterling's smile faltered. "What does that mean?" "What tree?" "Article 2, Vance announced, ignoring the interruption. "To our son, Sterling Thorne." "Here it comes," Sterling muttered. straightening his tie, though his hands were trembling. The big one. We leave to Sterling the bequest he has earned through his actions over the last 2 years. Vance read. We leave him the lesson in humility. Is that a boat? Mallory whispered loudly. Or a summer house? The lesson in humility, Vance continued, consists of the full and sole assumption of the $15 million in corporate debt that Sterling Thorne secretly accrued under his personal guarantees, masquerading as company operational costs. The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the hard drive in Vance's laptop. Sterling's face went the color of ash. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was as if someone had punched him in the solar plexus. 15 million, Mallory shrieked, her voice cracking. She stood up, knocking her chair back. What debt? Sterling told me the company was profitable. He said we were rich. Vance turned a page. Furthermore, included in this bequest is the physical transfer of 3 binders of evidence regarding tax fraud and embezzlement committed by Sterling Thorne against the family estate. These documents have been prepared for submission to the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Should the beneficiary contest this will, You can't do that, Sterling stammered. He looked like he was going to vomit. That debt that was strategic leveraging, I was going to pay it back after the sale. There is no sale, Vance said, his voice cutting like a guillotine. Article 3, the estate and enterprise. Vance read on. The ownership of the entirety of the Thorne Manor real estate, the controlling 51% stock option in Thorne Pharmaceuticals, and most importantly, the intellectual property rights to all past, present, and future formulas are hereby transferred to the holder of the heart of the family. The heart? Mr. Croat asked, looking confused. The heart, Vance clarified, pointing a long finger at the leather book sitting in front of me, is defined in the 1992 Charter as the keeper of the original research journals, the person who possesses the knowledge of the creation, not just the profit of the sale. That person is Callista Thorne. Sterling shook his head violently. No, that clause is archaic. It can't hold up in court. Grandma died 20 years ago. I am the CEO. I have the contracts. The charter is ironclad, Vance said. But just in case there was any doubt, your grandmother included a specific exclusionary clause, a poison pill, if you will. Vance looked directly at Sterling. The look was one of pure, unadulterated judgment. The condition reads, any beneficiary who attempts to sell, transfer, or liquidate the family legacy to a direct competitor specifically named as Vortex Corp. Shall immediately forfeit all rights to the inheritance, regardless of blood relation. Sterling froze. His eyes went wide, staring at nothing. You signed a memorandum of understanding with Vortex Corp 48 hours ago, Vance said, pulling a photocopy of the document from the stack. We have the time-stamped email you sent to their vice president. By signing that paper, Sterling, you didn't sell the company. You resigned from the family. You trapped me, Sterling whispered. You knew. You let me sign it. We gave you a rope, I said, speaking up. You chose to tie the noose. Mallory turned on Sterling. She looked at him with a mixture of horror and revulsion. You are broke. You are $15 million in debt, and you don't own the house. Mal, baby, listen, Sterling pleaded, reaching for her hand. I can fix this. I just need time. I can fight this. Fight it with what? She screamed, slapping his hand away. You don't have money for a lawyer. You just inherited a lawsuit. You idiot. We are not finished, Vance interrupted. There is one final matter, the matter of character. He pressed a button on his laptop. The large monitor on the wall behind him flickered to life. The grainy black and white footage from the garden security camera filled the screen. It showed the events of yesterday afternoon. It showed the beautiful, ancient ginkgo tree. It showed Mr. Harlan standing his ground. And then, it showed Sterling. The room watched in silence as the on-screen Sterling shoved the 70-year-old man to the ground. We watched as Callista Me stepped in. We watched as Sterling threw his own sister, a woman with disabled hands, into the dirt. This, Vance narrated calmly, is a violation of the moral turpitude clause of the estate trust. Abuse of staff and physical assault of a family member are grounds for immediate disinheritance, separate from the financial stipulations. On the screen, Sterling loomed over me, shouting. The lack of audio made it somehow more grotesque. It looked like a predator cornering prey. Mr. Croat, Sterling's lawyer, slowly closed his briefcase. He didn't look at his client. He looked at the screen, then at Vance. I was not aware of this footage, Croat said, his voice cold, or the extent of the financial liability. I am afraid I cannot represent a client who has withheld material facts regarding criminal assault and fraud. Sterling turned to his lawyer. You can't quit, I pay you. Your check would bounce, Mr. Thorne, Croat said, standing up. And I do not wish to be named as a co-conspirator in a tax fraud case. Good day. Croat walked out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Sterling alone on his island of ruin. It's a lie, Sterling screamed, his composure shattering completely. He pointed a trembling finger at me. She staged it. She threw herself down. And that diary, it's a forgery. I am the heir. I am the son. You are a thief and a bully, I said, my voice steady. And now, you are a stranger. Sterling's eyes went wild. He looked at the thick document on the table, the paper that stripped him of his power. His money, and his name. Give me that. He lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He threw himself across the mahogany table, scattering the papers, knocking over the water pitcher. His hand clawed for the blue-ribboned document. Sterling, no, Mallory screamed, but he never reached it. Two burly security guards, who had been standing silently in the corners of the room, moved with practiced speed. Before Sterling's fingers could graze the wax seal, they had him. One guard grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. The other pinned his shoulder to the table. Get off me, Sterling roared, thrashing against them. This is my company. I own you. I own this building. You own nothing. Mr. Thorne, Vance said, calmly picking up the will and sliding it into his briefcase. Not even the suit on your back. Technically, as I believe it was charged to the corporate credit card, which is now frozen. I stood up. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of my brother. His face was pressed against the polished wood, his expensive haircut messed, his eyes wide with panic and rage. I looked down at him. I remembered the trash bag he had thrown at my feet. I remembered the basement. I remembered him mocking my hands. The 48 hours are up. Sterling, I said softly. Callista, he gasped, sweat dripping from his nose. Callista, don't do this. We are family. I am your brother. No, I said, touching the leather diary on the table. You fired your family. You sold them for a swimming pool. Now, you are just a trespasser. I looked at the guards. Please escort Mr. Thorne out of the building, I ordered. My voice did not shake. And ensure he does not return to the manor. His access codes have been revoked. You can't do this, Sterling screamed as they hauled him up. He kicked and struggled, his dignity completely gone. I will sue you. I will destroy you. You already destroyed yourself, Vance said, closing the latch of his briefcase. We just swept up the pieces. They dragged him out. His screams echoed down the hallway, fading until the elevator doors dinged and swallowed him whole. The room fell silent again. Mallory stood alone on the other side of the table. She looked at the empty door, then at me. Her hand dropped from the diamond necklace. She looked small, cheap, and terrified. Callista, she started, her voice a high, thin whine. I didn't know. You have to believe me. He forced me. I always liked you. I told him he was being too hard. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the calculation. She was already trying to figure out if she could switch sides. The necklace. Mallory, I said, extending my hand. She froze. What? The Aurora diamond, I said. It belongs to the estate. Give it to me. She hesitated for a second. her fingers curling around the gems. For a moment, I thought she would refuse, but then she looked at Vance, who was reaching for his phone, likely to call the police. With trembling fingers, she undid the clasp. She dropped the heavy necklace into my open palm. "Get out," I said. She didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and ran out the door, her heels clacking frantically on the floor, chasing after a husband who was no longer a millionaire, but a liability. I stood there, the cool diamonds heavy in my palm, the leather diary under my other hand. The room was quiet. The storm outside had broken, and a single shaft of gray light pierced through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Vance took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Well," he sighed, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. "That went exactly according to the script." "Not exactly," I said, looking at the door where my brother had been dragged out. "He didn't learn the lesson." "Some people are incapable of learning, Callista," Vance said gently. "That is why we have laws, and that is why we have wills." I looked down at the diary. Grandma Alara had been right. She had seen the rot in Sterling 30 years ago. She had prepared the medicine. It was bitter, and it was harsh, but it had excised the infection. "What happens now?" I asked. Vance opened a second folder, one I hadn't noticed before. "Now," he said, "we start the transfer of titles, and then, Ms. Thorne, you have a company to save. The board is meeting at 2:00. They are expecting the new chairman." I looked at my hands. The braces were still there. The pain was still there, but for the first time in 6 months. They didn't feel useless. They felt like they had work to do. "Let's go," I said. "I don't want to be late." The silence that had settled over the conference room was shattered less than a minute later by the sound of scuffling in the hallway. The heavy oak doors, which had just closed on my brother's exile, burst open again. 2 uniformed officers, who must have been waiting by the elevators, marched Sterling and Mallory back into the room. "We are not done," Arthur Vance said, his voice cutting through Sterling's incoherent protests. "There is the matter of the final distribution, and since you, Sterling, are the primary subject of the lesson in humility, your parents explicitly requested your presence for this part. Sit down." Sterling was shoved into his chair. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash only to be told he had to fly the return leg. His suit was rumpled, his tie pulled askew, and his eyes darted around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. Mallory slumped into the chair beside him, clutching her purse to her chest, her face drained of all color. "I told you," Sterling hissed, though the fire had gone out of his voice, replaced by a desperate, whining tone. "I don't want anything else. I just want to leave." "You don't get to leave until the legacy is fully transferred," Vance said. He turned to me. "Callista, step forward." I walked to the head of the table. Vance reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, unassuming wooden box. It was made of cedar, scarred and scratched, with brass hinges that had darkened with age. It was the box that had sat on the mantel in the library for as long as I could remember. It was the box I used to stare at when I was a child, wondering what treasures it held. "The itemized bequest lists this as having 0 commercial value," Vance said, placing it in my damaged hands. "But your father insisted it was the heaviest thing in the will." I ran my thumb over the rough wood. It didn't feel heavy. It felt warm. "Open it," Vance whispered. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet that had worn thin over the decades, were 2 things: a thick, spiral-bound notebook with a cover stained by tea and chemical reagents, and a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant script. "That's it," Sterling scoffed, trying to muster some of his old arrogance. "A notebook, I told you. Callista, trash. They left you trash." I ignored him. I picked up the notebook. I recognized it immediately. It was Grandma Alara's master cookbook. It wasn't a formal lab journal. It was her personal sketchbook of ideas. The place where she wrote down the why behind the how, It contained the philosophical core of her work, the intuitive leaps that no computer could replicate. "That notebook," Vance said, addressing the room, "is legally designated as the source code of the Thorn legacy by possessing it. Callista, you hold the patent rights to the foundational chemistry of the company. It is not liquid cash. It is the well from which the cash flows." I picked up the letter. My hands trembled, not from nerve damage this time, but from the sheer emotional weight of seeing my mother's handwriting. "Read it," I whispered to Vance. "Please, I don't think I can." Vance took the envelope. He opened it with a silver letter opener, the sound of tearing paper echoing in the quiet room. He unfolded the letter, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. "My dearest Callista," Vance began, his voice softening, taking on a cadence that sounded achingly like my father. "If you are reading this, then we have failed to protect you from the storm, but we hope we have given you the shelter to survive it." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. "We have left you $0 in cash." Vance read, "We know this will hurt. We know it will feel like abandonment. But we did not do it to punish you. We did it because we know Sterling. If we left you money, he would find a way to take it. He would sue you, trick you, or guilt you until it was gone. He sees value only in numbers. He sees a bank account as a scorecard." Sterling shifted in his chair, staring at the table. "But you, my brilliant girl." The letter continued. "You know that value lies in people. You know that wealth is not what you have, but what you can create. We have watched you in the lab. We have watched you in the garden. You have the one thing Sterling can never buy and can never steal. You have the gift. You have the mind that questions and the heart that listens." Vance paused, looking at Sterling, who was now gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. "Sterling thinks power is a hammer," Vance read. "But you know, power is a seed. We leave you the box, the notebook, and the diary because they are the tools of a creator. We leave Sterling the debt because it is the burden of a consumer. Do not be afraid of the poverty, Callista. It is temporary. Your intellect is the mint. Go make your own fortune. We love you, more than there are stars in the sky. Mom and Dad." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt a sob rise in my chest, a mixture of grief and profound relief. They hadn't abandoned me. They had protected me. They had hidden my inheritance in the one place Sterling would never look in the work itself. "This is ridiculous," Sterling suddenly shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. The noise made Mallory jump. "Sentimentality. That's all this is. Sentimental garbage. You can't run a pharmaceutical conglomerate with heart and seeds. You need a CEO. You need someone who can sign checks." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look at her," he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. "She is a cripple. Look at her hands. She can't even hold a pipette. She can't sign a contract without a special pen. You think the board is going to follow her? She is broken. She is a damaged goods charity case." The insults hung in the air, toxic and cruel. In the past, they would have made me shrink. They would have sent me running to my room to hide my scars. But today, standing at the head of the table with my parents' love in my hand and my grandmother's wisdom in my bag, I felt something shift inside me. The shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard strength. I placed the wooden box on the table. I placed my hands, my scarred, braced, trembling hands flat on the mahogany, right next to the box. "You are right, Sterling," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. It filled the room. "My hands are damaged. I cannot hold a pipette. I cannot play the piano anymore." I looked him dead in the eyes. "But my head is not broken," I said. "I can calculate the molar mass of a complex protein in my sleep while you are still trying to figure out how to cheat on your taxes. I can visualize a molecular bond that will cure a disease while you are busy buying suits you can't afford." I took a step closer to him. "And most importantly," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a shout. My conscience is not broken. I never looked at our parents and saw a payout. I never looked at a loyal employee and saw a liability. You have two working hands, Sterling, but you have used them only to steal and to hurt. I would rather have my clawed hands than your rotten soul. Sterling opened his mouth to retort, but he had nothing. He slumped back, defeated by the truth. Well said, Vance murmured. He closed the folder. However, there is one final loose end, a matter that concerns Mrs. Thorne. Mallory froze. She had been trying to make herself invisible, shrinking into her designer coat. I don't have anything to do with the company. I just signed where Sterling told me to. Not exactly, Vance said. He picked up a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. During our audit of Sterling's embezzlement, we found a series of interesting wire transfers, monthly transfers of $10,000, moving from the household account to a private account in the Cayman Islands. Sterling frowned, looking at his wife. Cayman Islands. We don't have an account in the Caymans. I use the Swiss accounts. You don't, Vance said. Mallory does. Sterling turned to Mallory. Mal. What is he talking about? Mallory's lip trembled. She wouldn't meet his eyes. The account is registered under the name Phoenix Rising LLC, Vance continued, enjoying this part clearly, and the beneficiary is listed as Mallory Thorne and a Mr. Jean-Luc Dubois. Dubois? Sterling's eyes went wide. My tennis coach. You are sending money to my tennis coach. It appears, Vance said dryly, that Mrs. Thorne has been planning an exit strategy for quite some time. The emails we recovered suggest that she intended to file for divorce immediately after the inheritance was secured. She and Mr. Dubois were planning to purchase a villa in Tuscany with the proceeds. The room spun. I watched Sterling's face crumble. He had lost his company. He had lost his fortune. He had lost his family. And now, he was realizing that the trophy wife he had paraded around like a prize was actually a parasite feeding on him just as he had fed on our parents. You, Sterling whispered, staring at Mallory as if she were a stranger. You were going to leave me after I bought you everything after I sold the company for us. Mallory stood up. Her facade of the supportive wife dissolved instantly. She looked at Sterling with pure contempt. For us, she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You did it for your ego. Sterling, you are a drowning man, and I wasn't going to let you pull me down. Jean-Luc actually listens to me, and he doesn't need to steal from his parents to buy dinner. You cheated on me, Sterling choked out. With the tennis coach. I did what I had to do to survive, Mallory said coldly. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, the massive, gaudy rock Sterling had bought her with embezzled funds 3 years ago. She pulled it off. It was a struggle, but she yanked it over her knuckle and dropped it onto the table. It spun on the wood, making a hollow, rattling sound before coming to rest next to the wooden box. It's cubic zirconia anyway, Mallory spat. I had it appraised last week. You even lied about the jewelry, Sterling. You are a fraud in every sense of the word. She turned to me. I assume the police are outside. They are waiting for Sterling, Vance said. But since you are a co-signatory on the fraudulent tax returns, I suggest you don't go far. However, you are free to leave this room. Mallory didn't look back. She didn't say sorry. She simply straightened her coat, stepped over Sterling's outstretched legs, and walked out the door. Sterling watched her go. He looked at the ring on the table. He looked at the wooden box. He looked at the empty chair where his lawyer had sat. He was completely alone. He put his head in his hands and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream. It was the sound of a hollow structure finally collapsing under its own weight. It's over, Sterling, I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The lesson is over. I picked up the wooden box and the notebook. I turned to Vance. I'm ready to go, I said. I have a garden to replant. Vance nodded. He signaled to the officers. They stepped forward, gently but firmly lifting the broken man from the chair. Sterling didn't fight them this time. He was a shell. As I walked out of the conference room, I didn't look back at him. I looked forward, down the hallway, toward the elevator that would take me down to the street, and then back to the house that was finally, truly, mine. The weight of the box in my arms felt like an anchor, grounding me. I had $0 in my pocket, but I felt richer than I had ever been in my life. The drama in the conference room had ended, but the dismantling of Sterling Thorne was far from over. As the security guards hauled my brother toward the elevator, Arthur Vance did not pack up his briefcase. Instead, he checked his watch with the precision of a conductor timing the final crescendo of a symphony. "The police are not the only ones waiting downstairs. Callista," Vance said, motioning for me to follow. "I took the liberty of making a few phone calls while you were in the basement last night. I thought it best to rip the bandage off all at once." We took the private elevator down to the lobby. The doors slid open to reveal a scene that looked less like a legal office foyer and more like a shark tank. Standing by the glass doors, blocking the exit, was a phalanx of men in gray suits. I recognized a few of them. There was the vice president of First National Bank, a man Sterling had golfed with every Sunday for 5 years. Next to him stood 2 men who didn't look like bankers. They had the thick necks and ill-fitting suits of private debt collectors, the kind hired by the shadowy syndicates Vance had mentioned. When Sterling emerged from the other elevator, flanked by the building security, he saw them. He stopped dead, his shoes skidding on the polished granite floor. "Jerry!" Sterling gasped, looking at the banker. "What are you doing here? Tell these gorillas to let me go." Jerry did not smile. He did not offer a handshake. He held up a tablet. "Mr. Thorne, as of 9 o'clock this morning, First National has called in your personal lines of credit. We received a tip regarding the fraudulent collateral you used to secure the loans. We are seizing all assets listed under your name to cover the deficit." "You can't do that," Sterling shouted, sweat flying from his forehead. "I am good for it. I just need a week." "You have 0 days. Mr. Thorne," one of the debt collectors grunted, stepping forward. "And my employers are less patient than the bank. We are here to ensure that you don't leave town with anything that belongs to us." "Let's take this outside," Vance suggested calmly. "We wouldn't want to cause a scene in the lobby." The procession moved out onto the sidewalk. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and biting. We walked toward the parking lot where Sterling had parked his pride and joy, a silver Aston Martin that cost more than the average house. He had bought it 6 months ago. The same week he cut the research budget for my department. But the car was not alone. A flatbed tow truck was already backed up against its bumper. A man in coveralls was hooking a chain to the undercarriage. "No!" Sterling screamed. Breaking free from the guard's grip, he ran toward the car, grabbing the tow truck driver's arm. "Get your hands off her. That is my car. That is a custom import." The driver shoved him off easily. "Repo order, buddy. Bank owns it now." Sterling watched in horror as the winch whined into life. The front wheels of the sports car lifted off the asphalt. It looked like a silver beast being dragged to the slaughter. This car was his identity. It was how he projected power. Without it, he was just a man in a rumpled suit standing on a wet sidewalk. He turned around, his eyes wild, scanning the faces of the men who used to envy him. He saw no sympathy. He saw only the cold calculation of creditors looking to salvage pennies on the dollar. Then, his eyes landed on me. I was standing under the awning of the building, leaning against a concrete pillar. I held the wooden box and the notebook against my chest. I looked calm. I looked stable. Sterling ran to me. He fell to his knees on the wet pavement, heedless of his Italian trousers ruining in the dirty water. He grabbed the hem of my skirt with shaking hands. "Callista," he sobbed, the sound raw and pathetic. "Callista, please, you can stop this. You have the company now. You have the millions. Write them a check, please. Just pay off the debt. It is nothing to the company accounts. I will pay you back. I swear." I looked down at him. The last time he had been this close to me, he was screaming in my face at the funeral. "We are family," Sterling pleaded, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. We have the same blood. Mom and Dad wouldn't want this. They wouldn't want their son to be destroyed by thugs and bankers. Help me. Callista. Please, be the bigger person. The bigger person. The phrase triggered a memory so vivid I could smell it. I remembered standing in the living room 48 hours ago. I remembered the smell of stale whiskey on his breath. I remembered the weight of the black plastic trash bag hitting my shins. I heard his voice, cold and amused, telling me not to dirty the oak floors. You have 48 hours to get out. He had looked at me then, not as a sister, but as refuse. He had been willing to throw me into the street with absolutely nothing, knowing full well I had medical needs, knowing I was grieving. He had planned to sell our grandmother's legacy to strip miners for a swimming pool. I looked at his hands clutching my skirt. They were grasping, desperate hands. Get up, Sterling, I said quietly. You'll help me, he asked, hope flaring in his eyes as he scrambled to his feet. Oh, thank God. I knew it. I knew you were soft. I knew you wouldn't let them ruin me. I didn't say that, I said. The hope vanished, replaced by confusion. You said, we are family, he stammered. No, you said that, I corrected him. I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about the trash bag you threw at me. I was thinking about the lesson you were so eager to teach me. I stepped back, pulling my skirt out of his reach. You were right, Sterling, I said, my voice steady and carrying over the sound of the tow truck engine. I have learned the lesson in humility. I learned it very well in the basement while you drank champagne upstairs. Callista, don't. And that lesson taught me something important, I continued, my gaze hard as flint. It taught me that humility is not about being weak. It is about knowing the value of things, and it taught me that you cannot tolerate evil just because it shares your last name. If I pay your debts. Sterling, I am not helping you. I am funding your sickness. I am telling you that there are no consequences for stealing, for lying, for hurting people. They will kill me, Sterling shrieked, pointing at the debt collectors. If I don't pay the $15 million, they will kill me. Then you should not have borrowed it, I said simply. That is your burden, not the company's, not mine. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He realized, finally, that the sister he thought was a doormat had become a steel door. However, I said, looking at Vance, I am not cruel. I will offer you a lifeline, not money, but freedom. Vance stepped forward, pulling a document from his jacket pocket. He had prepared it in advance. Of course he had. This, Vance said, holding up a clipboard, is a waiver of prosecution. Callista is willing to decline pressing charges for the embezzlement of company funds and the tax fraud committed against the estate. Sterling's eyes widened. You won't send me to jail. On one condition, I interjected. Anything. Sterling breathed. Anything. You leave Seattle, I said. Today, you leave Washington State. You go somewhere far away, and you start over. You get a job, a real job. You work with your hands. You learn what $1 actually costs. And you never, ever contact me, the company, or anyone associated with the Thorne family again. Sterling looked at the document, then at the tow truck dragging his car away, then at the debt collectors waiting like vultures. If he stayed, he went to prison for fraud, and the collectors would get him there. If he left, he was broke, but he was free. And the debt, he whispered, the personal debt is yours to manage. Vance said, I suggest you negotiate a payment plan, but without the threat of a federal prison sentence hanging over you. Perhaps you can find a way to pay it off, in 20 or 30 years. It was a humiliating offer. It stripped him of his status, his home, and his easy way out. It forced him to become the very thing he mocked a working-class nobody. Sterling looked at me one last time. He searched for a trace of the little sister who used to draw him pictures. He found only the CEO of Thorne Pharmaceuticals. With a shaking hand, he took the pen Vance offered. He signed the waiver. His signature, usually a flamboyant scrawl, was small and cramped. "Done," he whispered. "Good," I said. "Now go, before I change my mind." Sterling didn't say goodbye. He turned and walked away. He didn't walk toward the luxury car. That was gone. He walked toward the bus stop on the corner. He walked with his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit soaked with rain, a man carrying the heavy weight of his own choices. The debt collectors watched him go, then peeled off to follow him. They would be his shadow for a long time. I watched until he turned the corner and vanished. A strange sensation washed over me. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel a pang of loss, but all I felt was light. The heavy atmosphere of the last 6 months, the fear, the oppression, the constant need to make myself small so he wouldn't snap it all lifted. "He is gone," Vance said softly, putting the waiver in his briefcase. "Yes," I said. "He is." Vance turned to me, a genuine smile breaking through his professional demeanor. He extended his hand. "Then it is my great honor to be the first to congratulate you," he said. "Madam Chairwoman, the board is waiting for you, and the market is watching." "Let them watch," I said. I turned and walked out from under the awning. The clouds had finally parted, and a shaft of pale, winter sunlight hit the wet pavement, making the world look scrubbed clean. I stepped into the light. I looked down at my hands. I was still wearing the carbon fiber braces. They were still scarred. They still ached in the cold. But as I stood there in the sun, I realized I didn't feel the weight of them anymore. For months, I had looked at them as cages. Now, holding the box of seeds and the notebook, they looked like tools. Different tools than before, perhaps, but capable ones. I wasn't the girl who broke things anymore. I was the woman who was going to fix them. "Mr. Vance," I said, taking a deep breath of the crisp air. "Call a taxi. I don't want to keep the board waiting. We have a swimming pool to cancel and a garden to save." Vance chuckled. "I think we can do better than a taxi. Callista, look." He pointed to the curb. Old Mr. Harlan was pulling up in the vintage Rolls-Royce that had belonged to my father, the one car Sterling hadn't driven because he said it was too old-fashioned. Mr. Henderson, the family driver who had been fired along with Harlan, was behind the wheel. Mr. Harlan rolled down the window, grinning from ear to ear. "Your carriage awaits, Miss Thorne," Harlan called out. "I heard we have some planting to do." I smiled. A real, full smile that I felt all the way to my toes. I walked toward the car, leaving the shadow of the law office and the shadow of my brother behind me forever. The vintage Rolls-Royce crunched over the gravel of the driveway. A sound that used to signal my father coming home from a long day. Today, it signaled my return. "Mr. Henderson parked the car right in front of the massive oak doors of Thorne Manor. The rain had completely stopped, leaving the world washed clean, shimmering under the pale, determined light of the afternoon sun. I stepped out of the car. My legs felt steady. My spine felt straight. For the first time in 6 months, I did not look at the ground. I looked up at the stone facade of my ancestors' home. Across the double doors, a bright yellow tape had been plastered. It was stamped with the logo of the First National Bank and the word "seized" in bold black letters. It was Sterling's mark, the physical manifestation of his failure. I walked up the stone steps. I did not wait for a servant. I did not wait for a lawyer. I reached out with my braced right hand. I hooked my thumb under the edge of the tape. It was tough plastic, resistant and ugly. I pulled, with a sound like a zipper tearing open. The tape came free. I crumpled the yellow plastic into a ball and dropped it into the nearest planter. "Mr. Henderson," I said, turning to the driver who was beaming by the car door. "Please inform the staff that the house is open, and tell the chef I will be needing the kitchen in an hour. But first, I have a meeting to finish." I turned to Mr. Harlan, who was standing by the trunk, clutching his box of pruning shears like a soldier holding a rifle. "Mr. Harlan," I said. I am officially rehiring you as the estate manager. You will have full authority over the grounds, the greenhouse, and the staff roster. And since you will be doing the work of 3 people to fix the damage Sterling caused, your salary is double what it was yesterday. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He took off his cap and pressed it to his chest. Double, Miss Callista. I would do it for free just to keep those bulldozers away from the ginkgo tree. Labor has value. Mr. Harlan, I said, echoing my grandmother's words, we do not work for free, we work for worth. I left him to his garden and walked inside. The house was quiet, stripped of some of its furniture, scarred by the auction tags Mallory had plastered everywhere, but the bones were still there. The soul was still there. I did not stop to rest. I went straight to the library, set up my laptop, and initiated the video conference call that Arthur Vance had arranged. It was time to face the board of directors of Thorne Pharmaceuticals. The screen flickered to life, showing a grid of 12 faces. These were men and women who controlled billions of dollars. They looked skeptical. They saw a 26-year-old woman with visible physical disabilities, sitting in a half-empty room. I could see the doubt in their eyes. They knew about the debt. They knew about the scandal. They were ready to vote for the sale to Vortex Corp just to stop the bleeding. Good afternoon, I said. My voice was not loud, but the microphone picked up the steel in my tone. I am Callista Thorne, and as of 9 this morning, I am the majority shareholder and chairwoman of this company. Ms. Thorne, a silver-haired man in the top left corner, spoke up. It was heavyset George Benson, the longest-serving board member. We offer our condolences for your parents, but we must be realistic. The company is hemorrhaging cash. The debt your brother incurred is substantial. Vortex Corp has made a generous offer. We believe selling is the only fiduciary choice. The debt is personal, I corrected him. It belongs to Sterling Thorne, who has been removed from the company and the family. The company accounts are bruised, yes, but the foundation is solid. And as for Vortex Corp, I picked up the leather-bound notebook Grandma's source code. Vortex Corp wants to buy us because they ran out of ideas 10 years ago, I said. They are buying our past because they have no future. If we sell to them, we become a label on a generic bottle. We cease to be innovators. Innovation costs money, Benson argued. And you forgive me, Ms. Thorne, but you are not a CEO. You were a researcher. And now, with your injury, how can you lead a scientific company? I looked at my hands. I held them up to the camera so they could see the carbon fiber and the scars. You see broken hands, I said. I see hands that know the price of a mistake. I see hands that have felt the fire and survived. You are right. Mr. Benson, I cannot sign checks as fast as my brother did. I cannot hold a beaker. I leaned into the camera. But I have the map, I said, tapping the notebook. In this book are 12 formulas my grandmother developed but never released because the market wasn't ready. Natural synthetic hybrids for pain management without addiction. Non-invasive treatments for nerve regeneration. I know these formulas. I memorized them before I could ride a bike. Vortex doesn't want our buildings. They want this. And if you vote to keep me, we will not just survive. We will revolutionize the market within 2 years. The room went silent. They were business people, but they were also gamblers, and I had just put a pile of chips on the table that they didn't know existed. 2 years, a woman in the bottom row asked, Can you guarantee the nerve regeneration prototype? I am the prototype, I said. I will be the first patient. If it works on me, it works on the world. It was a lie, or rather, a projection of hope, but it was the kind of bold, terrifying promise that leaders make. Benson looked at the other members. He looked at me. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Motion to reject the Vortex acquisition offer, Benson said, and motion to confirm Callista Thorne as permanent CEO. Seconded, the woman said. Passed unanimously. Benson nodded. Get to work. Ms. Thorne? I closed the laptop. I let out a breath that shook my entire body. I had done it. I had saved the legacy with nothing but words and a bluff about a formula I still had to perfect. But that was tomorrow's problem. I went to the kitchen. It was the heart of the house, a place of copper pots and hanging herbs. It was empty of staff. Just as I had asked, I wanted to be alone. I filled the kettle with water. I lit the stove. The blue flame danced, reminding me of the lab fire. But I didn't flinch. I reached for the jar of dried chamomile and valerian root that Grandma used to keep on the top shelf. As the water boiled, I thought about Sterling, miles away, in the gritty gray reality of downtown Seattle. My brother was standing at a bus stop. I imagined him there, shivering in his suit that was now just wet wool, stripped of its status. He had no phone, no wallet, no car keys. He looked up, perhaps, at the television screen in the window of an electronics store. The news was playing. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Thorne Pharmaceuticals rejects takeover. Stock jumps. 15% under new leadership." He saw my picture. It was an old photo, one taken before the accident, where I was smiling in the garden. I imagined the look on his face. Not anger, not even jealousy anymore. Just a hollow, aching realization of what he had thrown away. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass because he liked the way the glass shined. He pulled his collar up against the wind. The bus arrived, heaving a sigh of hydraulic brakes. He stepped onto it, vanishing into the mass of humanity he had spent his life looking down upon. He was a ghost now, haunting a world he used to think he owned. Back in the kitchen, the kettle whistled. I poured the water over the herbs. The steam rose up, smelling of earth and sleep and safety. It smelled like home. I took the mug and the diary and walked to the small family altar in the hallway. It was a simple table with photographs of my parents and Grandma Ilara. I lit a candle. I opened the diary to the very last page. The ink was faded, written in the shaky hand of a woman near the end of her life. To my grandchild, she had written, "I have spent my life making medicine to extend life. But I have learned that the quality of life is not measured in years or in dollars. The richest man is not the one with the most money. The richest man is the one who has the best sleep. Live so that you can sleep, my love. Build so that others can rest. That is the only inheritance that matters." I looked at the photo of my parents. They looked happy. They looked proud. "I am sleeping tonight. Mom, Dad," I whispered. "I promise." I placed the diary on the altar, right next to the urns. It belonged there. It was done. I walked out through the French doors into the garden. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. The air was cool and crisp. Mr. Harlan had already been at work. The debris from the Vortex survey team had been cleared. The ground around the great ginkgo tree had been raked smooth. I walked to the center of the medicinal beds. The soil was dark and rich, smelling of rain and potential. I knelt down. My knees sank into the earth, staining my dress. But I didn't care. I took the small glass jar Mr. Harlan had given me. I unscrewed the lid. I tipped the 3 dark seeds into my palm. They were so small, so insignificant looking, yet they held the code for a plant that could stop a heart or restart it. I used my scarred, stiff index finger to poke 3 holes in the soil. I dropped the seeds in. One for Grandma, one for Mom, one for Dad. I covered them with dirt. I patted the earth down gently. A benediction. I stayed there for a long time, my hands resting on the ground. I looked at my hands. The scars were silver in the twilight. They looked like rivers on a map. They weren't ugly. They were a record of survival. They were the price I had paid to learn the lesson. Sterling had wanted the gold. He had wanted the finished product. He never understood that the real power was in the planting. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and damp earth. I was alone. I was tired. I was in pain. But I was free. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. The wind caught a loose strand of my hair. I looked toward the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. They left me $0, I said to the wind, my voice strong and clear. But they gave me the world, and the price of arrogance Sterling paid it all, every single penny. I turned back to the house. The lights were coming on, room by room, glowing warm and inviting against the night. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It was just a home, and I was finally ready to live in it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet room, or maybe on your way to work? Please leave a comment below to share your location and your thoughts on Callista's journey. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please subscribe to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little hope today. Your support means the world to us.